Why was everyone suddenly quiet in the mess hall? The morning had started like any other at Camp Pendleton, boots scuffing across linoleum, trays clattering, chatter rising over the smell of eggs and burnt coffee. Yet as sunlight spilled across steel tables, something in the air shifted. It wasn't the breakfast or the recruits. It was her. Sarah Chen sat alone at the far corner, a coffee untouched, her gaze steady, distant, the kind of look that said she'd seen more than anyone wanted to imagine. She wasn't wearing rank. No insignia, no badge of distinction. To anyone watching, she was just another staffer, maybe logistics, maybe intel. But those who knew better, the few who truly knew who she was, stayed quiet. They'd learned long ago that silence was the only respectful response around Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen. At 28, she'd already earned her trident, the impossible dream most never even attempted. She survived Bud S when half her class didn't make it past week 2. She fought, bled, and nearly died in operations the world would never hear about. And she'd done it all carrying the weight of being one of the very few, a woman among SEALs. Now she was here on assignment, observation duty, evaluating a new batch of recruits for an upcoming classified task force, not by reports, not by files, but by instinct, that subtle art of reading people's tells, their posture, their reactions. Because in her world, the smallest movement could mean survival or failure. Her mentor, Colonel Merrill Tangestal, had once told her, "True strength isn't loud, Sarah. It waits. It watches. It moves only when the moment demands." So she waited, watching from her corner as sunlight glinted off the polished tables and shadows stretched long across the floor. Across the room, 5 recruits entered, young, confident, too confident. Johnson, Martinez, Cooper, Williams, Thompson. All Force Recon Marines. All top of their previous units. All carrying the same flaw. They didn't believe she belonged. She'd read their files, seen the coded remarks between lines: exceptional performance, strong leadership, difficulty integrating with female command. They were good soldiers, but their pride was a wall, and pride was something Sarah had spent years breaking through, in herself, in others, in systems built long before she arrived. The 5 took seats together, laughter too loud, eyes scanning the hall like they owned it. When one of them noticed her, the others followed. A smirk spread across Thompson's face. Martinez leaned in, whispering something that made the group laugh. Sarah kept still, her eyes fixed on her cooling coffee. But in the reflection of her phone's dark screen, she watched them, each step, each shift in weight, the way they angled themselves unconsciously, forming a half circle. They were moving toward her. She exhaled quietly, setting her cup down. She'd seen that body language before, in alleys in Mosul, in warehouses in Jakarta. The same reckless confidence before a mistake. And that's what today was: not a fight, a test. What the recruits didn't know was that this entire mess hall had been part of their evaluation. Lieutenant Susan Cuddy, her counterpart in Operations Command, was scheduled to arrive soon. But Sarah already knew what was coming. They wouldn't wait. They'd act first, a decision that would tell her everything she needed to know about their judgment. The hum of conversation dulled as others noticed the developing tension. Even the kitchen staff seemed to pause. Several senior NCOs at the back exchanged glances, recognizing the stillness before impact. Thompson's voice finally broke the air. "Well, well," he said, grinning, "what do we have here?" Sarah didn't look up, didn't flinch, just stirred her coffee as if oblivious. Williams chuckled, stepping closer. "Hey, sweetheart, this area's reserved for combat personnel. Admin, that way." He pointed vaguely across the room, his voice dripping with mock politeness. The others laughed, the kind of laugh that wasn't about humor but dominance. Sarah's fingers tightened just slightly on the handle of her mug, a silent microsecond of tension. She'd seen worse, heard worse, but that didn't make it right, it just made her calm. Martinez leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. "You lost, ma'am?" he asked, emphasizing the word as an insult. She didn't answer. For a moment, only the sound of the overhead fan filled the room. Then Williams reached out, hand half extended toward her shoulder. Mistake. In a flash of movement too fast to register, Sarah caught his wrist, pivoted, and used his own momentum against him. The table clattered as his body slammed onto it, his tray skidding to the floor. Gasps filled the hall. Before the others could even process what happened, Sarah was already moving, years of reflex and training converging in precise economy. Cooper lunged, she sidestepped, redirected his force, and sent him crashing into Johnson. Thompson tried to grab her from behind. She dropped her center of gravity, flipped him over her shoulder, and pinned him with a controlled arm lock that made his face twist in pain. Martinez hesitated 1 second too long. She swept his legs from under him, his back hitting the floor hard. The entire confrontation lasted less than 10 seconds. Silence, total silence. 5 elite recon Marines, trained, strong, experienced, lay sprawled across tables and floor tiles, blinking in disbelief. Sarah straightened her uniform calmly, her breathing steady. No arrogance, no smirk, just the quiet authority of someone who didn't need to prove herself. Then the doors opened. Lieutenant Susan Cuddy entered, clipboard in hand, followed by Colonel Tangestal. Both stopped as they took in the scene, the mess hall frozen in awe. The colonel's voice sliced through the silence. Gentlemen at ease. The recruits scrambled to their feet, straightening instinctively. Colonel Tangestal continued, her tone sharp but steady. You've just had the privilege of meeting Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, Navy SEAL, Silver Star recipient, and your new tactical instructor. Every head turned toward Sarah. The recruits' faces drained of color. Their earlier smirks dissolved into stunned disbelief. Martinez started, but she. Lieutenant Cuddy interrupted softly. Yes, she. And she's the one who'll decide if you're ready for special operations. A long pause filled the air. Sarah finally spoke, her voice low, even carrying that quiet weight of command. Report to Training Field C at 500, every morning, for the next month. We'll see if you can learn what real strength looks like. She turned away, not waiting for a response. The words weren't a threat, they were a promise. The recruits stood frozen, the reality of what had just happened settling in. The mess hall stayed silent, an unspoken lesson echoing through every corner. Respect is earned, not assumed. That night Sarah sat alone again. The lights of the base shimmered in the distance, distant sounds of training drills echoing faintly. She held her trident between her fingers, that small golden emblem of years of pain, endurance, and silence. She remembered her mentor's voice. You'll never need to shout to be heard, Sarah. The ones who matter will see you by how you stand, not by how loud you speak. Her reflection in the window showed someone she barely recognized, calm, collected, but behind the eyes, exhaustion lived quietly. Years of pushing against expectation, against history, against whispers that said you don't belong here. But she did. She'd proven it in the field, under fire, under doubt. And tomorrow, she would teach 5 men to understand something the military hadn't taught them yet. That discipline was more than muscle, that leadership was more than command, and that respect wasn't given by gender, rank, or title. It was earned over time by integrity. As the night deepened, a voice echoed faintly over the loudspeaker, marking lights out. Sarah stood, setting her trident down gently beside her coffee mug. She whispered to herself, almost inaudibly, sometimes, the strongest battles are fought without anyone seeing. Outside, the flag over Camp Pendleton stirred in the coastal wind, silent, unwavering, just like her. And in the quiet hum of the base, 5 recruits lay awake, restless, replaying those 10 seconds over and over, realizing that the world they thought they knew had just changed forever. Why did they show up before dawn and still look like they'd already been defeated? The wind carried a sharp bite that morning. slicing through the pre-dawn haze that settled over training field sea floodlights through long shadows across the obstacle course, illuminating rows of equipment, sandbags, ropes, cold mud pits still glistening with dew. The silence was broken only by the rhythmic pounding of waves from the nearby coast and the hum of generators keeping the lights alive. Sarah Chen stood in the center of the field, clipboard in hand, uniform immaculate, her expression unreadable, calm, still, watching. At precisely 04:59, the 5 recruits appeared: Johnson, Martinez, Cooper, Williams, and Thompson, their faces set, pride barely holding together the embarrassment from yesterday's incident in the mess hall. None of them spoke. Their footsteps were heavy, the air between them thick with tension. Sarah's voice cut through the morning stillness. 0500, on the dot, she said softly. Good, you can follow orders. No one dared answer. Her gaze swept across them, steady and sharp. What you did yesterday wasn't a mistake, she continued. It was a revelation. You showed me exactly who you are when your ego is challenged. That's what this month will fix if you let it. Thompson shifted slightly, jaw tight. Sarah caught the movement. Something to say, recruit. He straightened, eyes forward. No, ma'am. She stepped closer, not aggressively, but with the slow precision of someone used to command. Then let's start, she said. Drop your gear, 10-mile run, full kit. Time starts now. They hesitated, just long enough for her to notice. Move. The bark in her tone hit like a gunshot. Instantly, they sprinted toward the marked trail, boots pounding the dirt. Sarah watched them disappear into the mist, then checked her stopwatch. The run wasn't about endurance, not yet. It was about obedience, about how quickly they could strip away pride and accept discomfort as a teacher. In combat, it isn't your muscles that keep you alive, she thought. It's your humility. She waited, listening to their fatting breaths, the echo of discipline being reborn one step at a time. By the time they returned, the horizon was glowing with the first orange light of dawn. Thompson stumbled first, hands on his knees. Martinez was drenched in sweat, jaw clenched in frustration. Williams fell to the ground beside his pack, gasping. Cooper and Johnson collapsed next to him, both fighting to catch their breath. Sarah didn't move, didn't congratulate, didn't comfort. 8 miles, she said quietly, glancing at her stopwatch. Not 10. No one replied. Failure, she added, but expected. Get up. They groaned, struggling to their feet. Thompson muttered under his breath, We're not machines. Sarah turned sharply. You're right, she said, her voice suddenly softer. Machines break easier, you adapt. For a moment her eyes softened, just a flicker of empathy before the steel returned. Hydrate, then we start drills. The next hours blurred into a symphony of sweat, sand, and silence. She ran them through endurance circuits, push-ups, rope climbs, simulated casualty drags. Every time one of them faltered, she watched not to punish but to understand. Johnson had power but lacked control. Martinez was fast but impatient. Cooper relied on brute strength. Williams was precise yet hesitant. Thompson led but led wrong, using pride instead of trust. Each weakness she filed away quietly, mentally noting who they were beneath the uniform. By midday the sun was punishing. The recruits were drenched, their fatigues heavy with sweat and dirt. Still, Sarah showed no sign of fatigue. She moved among them with calm authority, her voice neither raised nor cruel, just unyielding. Why are you here? She asked suddenly, packing before them. No one answered. Why are you really here? She pressed. Johnson broke first. To serve, he said hoarsely. Sarah's gaze fixed on him. Everyone serves, Johnson. That's not a purpose. That's a requirement. Silence. Then she asked, why do you want to be special operations? Thompson answered this time, to be the best. Sarah's tone hardened. The best at what? He hesitated. At everything. She stepped closer until she was inches from his face. Her voice dropped to a whisper. The best don't talk about being the best, they just don't quit. That's what makes them different. Her words hung heavy in the air. None of them dared look up. Take 5, she finally said, turning away. While they rested, Sarah walked to the edge of the field, eyes fixed on the horizon. The ocean stretched endlessly beyond the cliffs, calm, deceptive, powerful. It reminded her of her first mission in the Philippines years ago. The heat, the sound of rotors, the chaos when everything went wrong. She'd lost a teammate that day, Ramirez, someone who'd believed in her when others hadn't. You don't have to prove anything, Ramirez had told her once, handing her a ration bar before a night op. Just be solid when the world is. She never forgot that. A voice interrupted her memory. Ma'am. It was Williams, the quiet one. He stood a few feet away, his posture hesitant. Permission to speak freely, he asked. Sarah nodded. You didn't have to show up here, he said quietly. You could have stayed in command. You've earned that, so why this? Why us? Her eyes softened again, not visibly, but enough that her silence stretched long before she answered. Because, she said, someone once looked at me the way you all did yesterday, and instead of crushing me, they trained me. I'm here to return that debt. Williams swallowed hard. We didn't mean. You meant it, she cut in gently, and that's why you'll learn. He nodded, stepping back without another word. As the day drew toward evening, fatigue began transforming into something else, focus. Sarah watched them push through pain barriers they hadn't touched before. She didn't yell. She didn't cheer. She guided, subtly, always calm, always watching. At one point, Martinez stumbled during a crawl, face hitting the mud. Johnson reached out instinctively, pulling him back up. No one told him to. Sarah caught the moment, marking it silently. The beginnings of unity. By sunset, the 5 recruits stood lined up before her, covered in mud and sweat, breathing heavy but still upright. Sarah studied them quietly. Then finally, better, she said, just that one word. For soldiers, sometimes one word means everything. She stepped closer, her boots crunching softly on gravel. You think strength is how hard you hit, or how loud you shout orders, she said, voice low. It's not. It's how much pain you can carry without letting it turn you cruel. Real warriors don't just survive, they preserve what's human inside them. Her eyes drifted across their faces, raw, open, humbled. You want to wear a trident, she asked. Then start acting like a team, because the ocean doesn't care how strong you are. It only cares how long you can hold on. A faint smile ghosted across her lips. Dismissed. Be here at 4:30 tomorrow. You'll wish it was today again. That night in the barracks, none of them spoke for a long time. They were too tired, too aware of how much further they had to go. Thompson sat on his bunk, staring at the floor. Martinez was cleaning his gear silently. Johnson wrote something in a small notebook, names, times, maybe reminders. Cooper sat by the window, watching the base lights flicker. And Williams, the youngest, turned over in his bunk, whispering just loud enough for Thompson to hear. She's not like anyone I've trained under before. Thompson didn't reply for a while, then quietly, no, she's not. In her office, Sarah sat with her boots off, rubbing the ache from her shoulders. The silence of night wrapped around her, punctuated by the faint rhythm of waves against the shore. She opened a drawer and pulled out a small photograph, a grainy image of her Bud-S class. Half the faces gone now, some retired, some buried. She ran a finger across the edges, lingering on one familiar smile, Ramirez. You were right, she whispered. Strength isn't about power, it's about patience. She closed her eyes for a moment. The fatigue was bone deep, but beneath it lived something else, purpose. The recruits would learn. She'd make sure of that, not because she wanted respect, but because she believed the next generation had to be better, not just at fighting wars, but at understanding why they fought them. Outside, the wind howled softly against the flagpole, echoing across the dark field where 5 men would soon return at dawn, humbled, uncertain, but slowly changing. Sarah leaned back in her chair, whispering almost to herself. Respect isn't given by command, it's earned through endurance. And as the lights dimmed across Camp Pendleton, somewhere between exhaustion and resolve, she allowed herself one small, tired smile. Because change had already begun. How far can you push someone before they finally stop fighting you and start fighting for something? The second week began under rain, not the kind that passes quickly, but the kind that lingers steady, cold, relentless. The sky hung low over Camp Pendleton, gray and heavy, matching the mood that had settled over the recruits. Training Field C had become their personal purgatory. Mud clung to everything: boots, uniforms, skin. The wind howled off the Pacific, biting through layers of fabric, carrying with it the smell of salt and steel. At 4:30, the 5 recruits stood in formation, soaked before the drills even began. Sarah Chen paced slowly before them, her cap low, her voice calm against the storm. "Pain," she said, "isn't punishment, it's information. It tells you who you are when everything's stripped away." Thompson shifted, the rain trickling down his face. He looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. He'd learned that lesson already the hard way. Sarah continued, "You want to lead, you want to fight beside the best. Then stop running from the pain, listen to it, learn from it." Her boots splashed through puddles as she stopped in front of Martinez. "You think fast," she said. "You shoot faster, but you lose patience. You let emotion decide your pace. That'll get someone killed one day." Then she turned to Johnson. "You've got muscle, but your mind wanders. Combat doesn't care how strong you are if you hesitate at the wrong second." Her eyes swept to Cooper. "You rely too much on brute force. You don't adapt." To Williams, "You think too much. You calculate before every move. In war, thought and instinct have to become one." Finally, she faced Thompson. "And you don't trust anyone but yourself. That's not leadership. That's fear wearing pride as armor." No one spoke. Rain pounded harder. Sarah took a breath, her tone softening barely. "The ocean doesn't forgive arrogance. Neither do enemies. Remember that." She stepped back. "Now move, drown-proofing drills, full gear." The recruits groaned inwardly but didn't hesitate. They jogged toward the pool area, rainwater streaming off their helmets. Sarah followed silently, her expression unreadable, but inside, something heavy stirred. The indoor training pool was silent except for the echo of water and the occasional cough of exhaustion. Weighted ropes and sandbags lined the edge. The air smelled of chlorine and fatigue. Sarah watched as each recruit entered the water, hands bound, feet tied, the standard Navy drown-proofing test. Panic was the real test here. Control of the mind, not the body. Johnson went first. He sank like a stone but fought his way back up, rhythm steady. Martinez followed, thrashing at first, then finding calm. Cooper lasted longer than expected. Williams surprised everyone, quiet, smooth, deliberate. Then came Thompson. He hit the water hard, his movements precise until something shifted. His breathing quickened. His kicks lost rhythm. The calm broke. He started to fight the water instead of moving with it. Sarah saw it immediately, the old mistake of control. "Relax your body, Thompson," she called. He didn't respond. Panic flickered across his face as he struggled for air. Without hesitation, Sarah dove in, boots and all. The water was freezing, the weight of her gear dragging her down, but her movements were sharp and exact. She reached him in seconds, grabbed his vest, and pulled him up with practiced strength. They broke the surface together, gasping. "Let go," she ordered. He resisted, grabbing her arm. "I'm fine." "Let go, Thompson." The authority in her voice cut through everything. He released. She guided him to the edge, both panting, both silent. The other recruit stood frozen, watching the scene unfold. Sarah climbed out first, dripping, her hair plastered to her neck. "That," she said between breaths, "is why ego gets people killed." Thompson didn't respond. He just sat there, staring at the water, shame mixing with exhaustion. Sarah crouched beside him. "You think control means winning," she said softly. "It doesn't. It means trusting that sometimes you're not the strongest one in the fight. The ocean decides who breathes. You just survive it." Her tone was calm, but her eyes betrayed something else: memory. The kind that doesn't fade. Later that night, while the recruits cleaned gear in silence, Thompson approached her office. He hesitated at the door, then knocked. "Enter," came her voice. He stepped in, posture stiff. She was sitting behind her desk, reviewing after-action reports. Her uniform jacket hung on the chair, sleeves rolled up, a faint scar visible along her forearm, thin, white, deliberate. A story she never told. "Permission to speak, ma'am?" he asked. She nodded without looking up. "I wanted to thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For pulling me out, for not making a show of it." She finally looked at him. "That's not gratitude, that's expectation. You're my responsibility." He shifted. "Still, I misjudged you." Sarah leaned back, folding her arms. "You misjudged yourself. I just gave you the mirror." He looked down, ashamed. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," she said. "Every day you'll wake up fighting the part of you that wants to quit. That never stops, it just gets quieter." A beat of silence. Then she added almost absently, "When I was in Jakarta, my team got ambushed during extraction. We were outnumbered. The one thing that kept us alive wasn't firepower, it was trust. Blind, complete trust. Without it, none of us would have come back." Thompson nodded, unsure what to say. He sensed the weight behind her words, the ghost she carried quietly. "Get some rest," she said, turning back to her files. "Tomorrow's worse." He managed a faint smile. "Yes, ma'am." When he left, Sarah stared at the closed door for a long moment. Then she opened the drawer again, the same photo of her Bud S class. Her eyes lingered on Ramirez. "Still paying it forward," she whispered. By the third week, the team had begun to change. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something raw, a quiet respect that didn't need words. They moved as one during drills, covering each other instinctively. Sarah watched the transformation with a strange mix of pride and unease. This was the part she never liked, the moment when soldiers started to remind her of her old team. The same brotherhood, the same blind trust. Because trust made you strong, but it also made loss unbearable. During a navigation exercise one night, Williams approached her again, compass in hand. "Ma'am," he said, "our coordinates are offset by 3 clicks. Could this be intentional?" Sarah looked over his shoulder. "Everything here is intentional, Williams, including mistakes." He frowned. "Then what's the lesson?" She smiled faintly. "That no map will save you if you don't learn to trust your own sense of direction." They found the target location 2 hours later, soaking wet, freezing, but grinning like kids. For the first time since this started, Sarah saw them laugh. Not mockery, not pride, just relief, shared and honest. And she realized something else. They were ready, almost. The next morning, Colonel Tangestal visited the training field. Her presence always carried quiet authority, silver hair tucked neatly beneath her cap, her uniform crisp despite the weather. "You've pushed them hard," she said to Sarah as they watched the recruits dismantle a mock fob. "They needed it," Sarah replied. "They're responding well." The colonel's tone softened. "Better than expected." Sarah nodded, but her expression was distant. "You're thinking about the mission," Tangestal said. Sarah's jaw tightened. "You still haven't told them." "They don't need to know yet." "They will soon," Sarah replied almost to herself. Tangestal studied her quietly. "You've done more than train them, Sarah. You've rebuilt them." Sarah's gaze stayed on the recruits, their silhouettes moving through the mist. "I didn't rebuild them," she said softly. "I just tore down what didn't belong." The colonel smiled faintly. "Same thing, really." Then she added, "Debrief tomorrow at 1800. You'll get full mission parameters." Sarah nodded, but her eyes never left the field. That night the rain finally stopped. The sky cleared, stars scattered across the black like distant flares. The base lights shimmered faintly on the wet tarmac. Sarah stood outside her quarters, hands in her pockets, listening to the distant sound of waves. In the reflection of a nearby window, she saw her own face, calm but tired, shadows under her eyes. Behind that reflection, she could almost see Ramirez again, smiling, teasing, alive. "Don't get attached," she murmured to herself, echoing a line her old co used to say. "Attachment makes you hesitate." But even as she said it, she knew she already was. Because those 5 recruits, arrogant, stubborn, flawed, had started to mean something. Not as soldiers, as people. She closed her eyes, the ocean breeze brushing against her face. Tomorrow would bring the mission, and missions had a way of changing everything or ending it. She whispered, almost as if to the ghost she carried. Sometimes, the hardest part of leadership isn't the battle. It's knowing when you've trained someone to survive without you. The wind rose again, soft but certain, carrying her words into the dark. Why did the air in the operations room feel heavier than usual, as if even the walls were holding their breath? The storm had passed, but tension still hung over Camp Pendleton like low fog. It was 1800 hours. Inside the command building, the overhead lights hummed faintly, washing the steel briefing table in a dull yellow glow. 5 recruits sat on one side, uniforms crisp, eyes forward. Across from them stood Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, composed, unreadable, her trident gleaming faintly against the subdued light. Colonel Tangastal paced at the head of the room, tablet in hand. Lieutenant Cuddy stood beside her, arms folded. A projection flickered to life on the far wall, satellite imagery of a jungle-covered valley intersected by a narrow river, a handful of red markers blinking deep inside the terrain. "This," Tangastal began, her voice even but cold, "is your next theater of operation." The recruits leaned forward, silent. Sarah's gaze never left the screen. She already knew the region. The coordinates matched something she'd seen years ago, a ghost she thought she'd left behind. Tangastal continued, "Southern Mindanao. A remote insurgent cell has taken a humanitarian medical convoy hostage. 12 personnel, 2 of them American. Negotiations failed 48 hours ago. We lost contact with a drone recon team yesterday at 600. A murmur rippled through the room. The colonel pressed a button. A grainy image filled the screen, a small camp near the river, men with rifles, tents marked with civilian emblems. "The hostages are being moved every 12 hours, Cuddy said quietly. "Your mission is to locate, extract, and exfiltrate. 0 collateral. No direct engagement unless compromised. You'll insert at 2300 hours tomorrow." Thompson frowned. "Ma'am, what's our call sign?" Cuddy looked at Sarah. Tangastal gave a nod. Sarah stepped forward, her voice steady. "Echo 6. The recruit straightened at the sound, the same designation as Sarah's old unit, the one she'd lost in Jakarta. Thompson noticed the flicker in her eyes, but said nothing. Tangastal added, "Lieutenant Commander Chen will serve as mission lead. You 5 will form her ground team." She paused, letting that sink in. "If you succeed, you'll earn full clearance for the Joint Special Operations Task Force. If you fail—" She didn't finish. She didn't have to. Sarah took over. "You've been trained for this. Everything you've endured these past weeks wasn't for fitness, it was for clarity. Out there, confusion kills faster than bullets." Her gaze moved across each face. "No heroics, no assumptions. Follow orders, protect each other. That's the only way any of us come back." Hours later, the mess hall was nearly empty. The team sat together for the first time without drills, without commands, just silence, and the metallic rattle of forks against trays. Martinez broke the quiet. "You think this is real, a live op?" Cooper shrugged. "If it's Chen leading it, it's real." Johnson stared at his food untouched. I looked up Echo 6, he said quietly. It was a Black Ops SEAL unit. Record stopped 5 years ago. The others went still. Williams glanced at Sarah's empty chair across the hall. You think she lost people? Thompson finished for him. Yeah, you can see it in her eyes. No one spoke after that. That night, Sarah sat alone in her quarters. The hum of distant generators blended with the rhythm of rain beginning again outside. The mission files lay open on her desk, but her eyes weren't reading. They were remembering. Jakarta. Concrete dust. The sound of gunfire ricocheting off metal. Ramirez shouting through the comms, extraction point compromised. We're boxed in. She could still feel the heat, the panic, the silence that followed the last transmission. Her phone buzzed, breaking the memory. A message from Colonel Tangistal. Psych eval approved. You're cleared for deployment. Trust your instincts. M. Sarah stared at it for a moment, then set the phone down, her hand trembling slightly. She hated when they used that word cleared, as if grief were something you could stamp a date on. She whispered to the empty room, You'd hate this, Ramirez. Another rescue, same terrain, same ghosts. Then she exhaled, gathering herself. The mission wasn't about her. It never had been. The insertion came fast. Night, wind howling through the open bay of the Osprey. Inside, the red light bathed their faces in a muted glow. The roar of the engines filled the cabin, but beneath it, the team could hear each other breathing, shallow, steady, nervous. Sarah sat at the end, helmet on, comms active, eyes fixed on the terrain below. Her voice came through the headset, calm, clipped, precise. 30 seconds. Thompson checked his rifle. Copy. Remember, she said, we're ghosts tonight. In, out, no noise. Ma'am, Williams said, voice low, you ever get used to this part? The waiting, she asked. He nodded. Her answer came after a long beat. No, you just stop pretending it scares you. The green light flicked on. Go. They jumped into darkness. The jungle swallowed them whole. Wet earth, the scent of decay, the sound of insects buzzing loud enough to drown thoughts. Every movement left them drenched in humidity and silence. They advanced in 2-meter spacing, rifles up, eyes scanning. Sarah led the way, her movements fluid, instinctive, a ghost among trees. The team followed without question. They reached the outer perimeter of the enemy camp just before 100. A soft rain fell again, masking sound. Through her scope, Sarah counted 7 hostiles, 1 patrol vehicle, and the faint outline of tents along the riverbank. Visual confirmed, she whispered into the comms. Martinez, Johnson, flank left. Williams, Cooper, take overwatch. Thompson, you're with me. Acknowledged clicks followed. They moved like clockwork, coordinated, silent, deliberate. Sarah reached the first tent and paused. A muffled sob came from inside. Civilians. She signaled 2 fingers, hostages inside. Thompson nodded, covering her rear. She slipped her knife through the fabric seam, cutting a quiet entry. Inside, the dim glow of a lantern illuminated 3 figures, hands bound, eyes wide. A woman gasped when she saw Sarah's silhouette. U.S. Navy, Sarah whispered. Stay quiet. The woman nodded rapidly. Sarah cut their ties, her movements quick but controlled. Then a shout outside. Gunfire erupted. Contact front, Martinez's voice crackled in her ear. Sarah spun around. Move, move. She ushered the hostages out, signaling Thompson to cover them. The jungle exploded in chaos, flashes of light, bursts of sound, the sharp staccato of automatic fire. Williams' status. 2 hostiles down, more incoming. Sarah grabbed her radio. Echo 6, regroup on Beacon Alpha. She and Thompson darted through the underbrush, guiding the civilians. Bullets tore through leaves around them. Thompson returned fire in short bursts. The comms were a flurry of overlapping voices. Johnson hit shoulder wound, still mobile. Copy, keep moving. They reached a small ridge overlooking the extraction zone, a clearing near the river. The rotor thump of a drone evac filled the air, but something was wrong. The designated signal flares were already burning. Too soon. Sarah's blood went cold. They knew we were coming. A trap. Everyone fall back, she shouted. Then a blinding flash. The world detonated into light and noise. When she came to, everything was smoke and ringing. Her vision blurred. The ridge was gone, replaced by burning debris. Her radio hissed static. Thompson, she shouted, coughing. No response. She crawled through the mud, her side burning, ears bleeding from the concussion. In the flicker of flames, she saw him, half buried under a collapsed log, motionless. She pulled with all her strength, teeth clenched, dragging him free. He groaned, alive. Stay with me, she said. That's an order. His eyes blinked open, unfocused. Others. She looked back, chaos, no clear shapes, no voices. Her stomach twisted. Not again. She grabbed her radio. Echo 6 to command, we're compromised. Multiple casualties, grid 27 Charlie, request immediate evac. Static, then faintly Tangestal's voice. Copy Echo 6, extraction en route, hold position. Sarah pressed the earpiece tighter, voice breaking. We can't hold, we're pinned. A burst of gunfire cut her off. She turned, firing instinctively, each shot measured. 2 hostiles down, then 3. Thompson was beside her now, firing despite his injuries. The look in his eyes was something Sarah recognized, raw determination, the moment when training ends and instinct takes over. Ma'am, he shouted, left flank. She pivoted, dropping another hostile. Her movements were mechanical, precise, but beneath that calm was terror, because every sound, every flash echoed Jakarta. Every scream was Ramirez again. But not this time, not these men. Not again. The evac finally arrived, a Black Hawk dropping fast, floodlights cutting through smoke. The downwash whipped debris into the air. Sarah and Thompson hauled the civilians aboard first, then the rest of the team, bloodied, exhausted, but alive. As the helicopter lifted off, she looked down at the burning valley, the camp shrinking beneath them, a patch of flame in endless dark. William sat across from her, breathing hard, his hands shaking. Martinez had a bandage wrapped around Johnson's shoulder. Cooper sat silent, staring at nothing. Thompson leaned against the wall, pale, half-conscious. Sarah exhaled, her face streaked with dirt and rain. For the first time in years, she felt tears sting her eyes, not of fear, but of release. They made it. Hours later, back at base, the medics swarmed the landing zone. Sarah stepped off last, helmet under her arm, uniform torn and burned. Colonel Tangestal met her with a solemn nod. Casualty report. 0 KIA, Sarah said, voice hoarse. 4 wounded, all stable, hostages recovered. Tangestal's eyes softened. You did it. Sarah shook her head. We did. Her gaze drifted past the colonel to the stretcher where Thompson lay, giving her a weak thumbs up as they loaded him into the ambulance. She smiled faintly, exhaustion overtaking everything else. Cuddy approached quietly. You don't have to debrief tonight. Sarah looked out toward the horizon, where the sun was beginning to rise over the Pacific. No, she said, but they need to see me standing. As the light grew, Camp Pendleton stirred awake. The wind carried the faint sound of the flag lifting on its pole, snapping in the early dawn. Sarah stood alone on the tarmac, watching it rise. In her mind, she heard Ramirez's voice again. You just have to be solid when the world is. She whispered back, I tried. And for the first time in years, she believed it. Why is it that survival never feels like victory? The morning after the extraction, Camp Pendleton was quiet. Too quiet. The usual hum of drills and engines seemed to hold back, as if the base itself was pausing to listen to what came next. Inside the medical wing, machines beeped softly, their rhythm the only sound in the white, sterile air. Sarah Chen stood by Thompson's bed. He was asleep, pale beneath the harsh fluorescent lights, his arm immobilized in a sling. Dried blood crusted along his temple, a reminder that even success demanded sacrifice. On the next bed, Johnson was awake, his shoulder bandaged, staring at the ceiling. Martinez sat nearby, writing in a notebook, his hand trembling slightly. Cooper's ribs were wrapped tight, every breath a wince. Williams had stitches running along his forehead but refused to stay in bed. He was standing at the window, watching the sun break over the barracks outside. Sarah's boots echoed softly against the tile floor as she moved between them, silent, observing. She'd seen this scene before, different names, different faces, same aftermath. Victory always looked the same, bruised, bandaged, breathing. Alive but changed. Colonel Tangestal entered quietly, her presence commanding even in a whisper. "How are they?" Sarah didn't look up. "Alive physically." Tangestal's eyes softened. "You pulled off the impossible, 12 hostages recovered, no fatalities." Sarah's jaw tightened. Luck played its part. The colonel regarded her for a moment. Luck doesn't lead a team through ambush fire and extraction chaos. Skill does, and trust. Sarah didn't answer. Tangestal sighed. "You should rest, you're running on fumes." "I've rested before," Sarah said, her voice distant. "It never lasts." The colonel hesitated, then nodded. "There'll be a formal commendation next week. Debrief at 900 tomorrow. Get some sleep, Commander." When she left, Sarah stayed, watching Thompson breathe, listening to the heart monitor's rhythm. It sounded steady, real. And for some reason, that terrified her more than silence. Outside, the base was waking up. Recruits jogged along the perimeter track. A flag rose, snapping in the wind. Somewhere, a drill sergeant barked orders. Life was moving on as it always did. But inside Sarah, something stayed frozen. Later that afternoon, she sat by the edge of the training field, the same one where she'd first met the 5 recruits. The same mud, the same wind, but now, the ghosts were heavier. The field was empty except for a few distant trainees running drills, their laughter faint against the ocean's roar. She closed her eyes and heard it again, Jakarta, Ramirez's last words. "We're boxed in, I'll hold them off." "That's an order, Ramirez." "Then disobey it." She carried those words for years, buried them under missions, medals, and silence. But today, the past was louder than ever, because this mission had ended differently. No one died, and somehow that made it harder. It meant she'd done everything right, but she still didn't feel peace. She felt emptiness. The kind that only comes when you realize the war outside wasn't the real one. "Permission to sit, ma'am." The voice pulled her back. It was Williams. He stood beside her, still in partial uniform, eyes tired but steady. She nodded, "At ease, soldier." He smiled faintly and sat beside her on the bleachers. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally he said, "Thompson woke up, he asked for you." Sarah glanced at him. "I'll check on him later." "You should," Williams said quietly. "He thinks he failed you." Sarah frowned. "Failed me?" "Because you had to pull him out. He said it should have been the other way around." She exhaled slowly, looking back toward the horizon. "Tell him I don't measure worth in rescues." Williams nodded, hesitated, then said, "Ma'am, when we jumped into that jungle, I thought we were ready. I thought training had made us invincible, but out there," he paused, searching for words. "Out there it was different. You didn't just lead us. You kept us alive." Sarah's voice was soft. "You kept each other alive." He shook his head. "No, ma'am, you made us a team." For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind moved through the grass, the faint clang of a flagpole echoing somewhere nearby. Finally, Sarah asked, "You ever wonder why we do it? Why we keep going back?" William smiled faintly, because someone has to. She nodded, though her eyes were distant. That's what Ramirez used to say. He turned to her. Who was Ramirez? Sarah's gaze drifted downward. My second in command, Echo 6, Jakarta. He waited, knowing not to push. Good man, she continued after a pause. Loyal, brave, stubborn. He stayed behind so the rest of us could get out. William swallowed. You blame yourself. She didn't answer immediately. Command means you always blame yourself, even when you shouldn't. Then she stood, her voice shifting back to command, steady, composed. Get back to the infirmary, Williams. You're still on medical. He stood too, saluting. Yes, ma'am. As he walked away, she looked at the field once more, the same place where arrogance had turned to discipline, where she'd seen the spark of trust. Maybe, she thought, this was Ramirez's lesson finally paying off. That evening the debrief began. The operations room was dimly lit, the air heavy with exhaustion and antiseptic. The team sat at the long table, files open, coffee cups untouched. Colonel Tangestal stood at the head again, reading from a report. Echo 6, objective complete, 12 hostages extracted, 5 operatives wounded, none critical. Mission success status confirmed. The words should have felt triumphant. They didn't. Tangestal closed the folder. You all did what few could have done. You'll receive commendations at next week's ceremony. Thompson, his arm in a sling, managed a wry grin. Ma'am, does that mean we get to sleep for once? The colonel smiled faintly, temporarily. Laughter rippled through the room, small, tired, real. It broke the tension like a glass cracking under pressure. But Sarah didn't laugh. She stood by the far wall, arms folded, silent. When Tangestal dismissed the room, the others filed out, one by one, nodding, smiling, patting each other's shoulders. When the last one left, Tangestal turned to Sarah. You should be proud. Sarah didn't move. Pride's not the right word. Tangestal studied her quietly. Then what is? Relief, she said after a long moment, and guilt in equal measure. Tangestal's tone softened. You did everything right. So did Ramirez. The colonel's eyes lowered. He'd be proud of what you built here. Sarah exhaled slowly. Maybe, but I still hear his voice every time I give an order. Tangestal nodded. That's not a weakness, Sarah, that's memory, and memory's what keeps us human. Then with a faint smile, take the win, you earned it. Sarah almost smiled back, almost. The next day the base was alive again, choppers taking off, recruits running drills, the ocean mist drifting over the parade ground. The 5 men of Echo 6 stood together outside the armory, uniforms pressed, laughing about something trivial. Thompson's arm was still in a sling, but his voice carried energy again. Sarah approached from across the lot. The laughter quieted when they saw her, not out of fear, out of respect. Martinez spoke first. Ma'am, we were just saying we missed the mud. Sarah raised an eyebrow. You missed the mud. Cooper grinned. Yeah, beats sitting in medical. She shook her head, smiling for real this time. Careful what you wish for. They chuckled. William stepped forward holding a small wooden box. We, wanted you to have this. She opened it. Inside was a trident handcrafted, carved from wood, rough but precise. Beneath it, etched into a brass plate, were 5 names: Thompson, Martinez, Johnson, Cooper, Williams. For reminding us what real strength looks like, Williams said quietly. Sarah looked at the trident for a long time, her throat tightening. You didn't have to. Martinez grinned. Yeah, but we wanted to. Thompson added, besides, you already gave us something better than any medal. What's that? She asked. He smiled, belief. She couldn't speak for a moment. She just nodded, slow, deliberate, the kind of gesture that said everything words couldn't. That night, the sunset stretched long over the Pacific, waves breaking soft against the shore. Sarah stood alone on the cliffs overlooking the ocean, holding the wooden trident in her hand. The wind whipped through her hair, carrying the scent of salt and memory. She thought of all the faces she'd lost and all the ones she'd saved, of the arrogance that had turned to humility, of the silence that had become strength. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the ghosts pressing against her. She felt them standing beside her, quietly, like old comrades watching from somewhere beyond the horizon. She whispered to the wind, "Maybe this is what peace looks like." Then she closed her hand around the trident, the rough wood grounding her in the present. As darkness settled, her voice, calm, steady, certain, might have narrated the silence itself. We don't fight to prove we're stronger than others. We fight to prove we're still human, even when the world tries to take that away. And sometimes, the hardest victory is learning to live after the battle ends. The camera would fade to the ocean, waves colliding against rock, endless, patient, eternal. Moral undertone. Survival isn't about escaping death. It's about remembering what's worth living for. How do you teach peace when your whole life has been built on surviving war? 3 weeks had passed since the Mindanao extraction, and Camp Pendleton felt different. Or maybe Sarah had. The air still smelled of jet fuel and salt, but the sound of boots hitting pavement no longer stirred adrenaline. It stirred restlessness. Paperwork replaced gunfire. Meetings replaced missions. The silence was louder now than any battle she'd ever been in. In the command wing, Sarah sat across from Colonel Tangastal. Between them lay a folder stamped classified, Inter-Allied Training Initiative. Tangastal's tone was measured. The Joint Chiefs approved the restructuring. The next generation of operators will come from a multinational task force. You'll lead the pilot program. Sarah looked down at the folder, scanning the summary. Cross-unit integration, NATO and Pacific partners, psychological conditioning, leadership, adaptability. She frowned. So I'm supposed to train foreign recruits now. Tangastal folded her hands. You're not just training them, Sarah. You're designing the doctrine. Sarah leaned back, quiet. And the politics? The colonel smiled faintly. They'll be your real battlefield. A long silence followed. Sarah finally said, "Why me?" "Because you've done what others couldn't," Tangastal replied. "You built leaders out of doubters. You turned conflict into cohesion. We need that again, but on a global scale." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "This isn't about teaching tactics, is it?" "No," the colonel said. "It's about teaching values before the next war starts." That night, Sarah stood by the window of her quarters, watching the Pacific fade into darkness. Waves rolled endlessly beneath the silver moon, reflecting light like broken glass. Her reflection stared back at her, the faint lines under her eyes deeper now, her expression carved by years of command and consequence. A knock came at the door. "Come in," she said. It was Thompson, arms still healing but posture straight. Behind him were Martinez, Cooper, Johnson, and Williams, her Echo 6 team. "Permission to enter, ma'am," Thompson said with a grin. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "You just did." They laughed softly, a sound that felt out of place in the room but not unwelcome. Martinez stepped forward. "We heard you're being reassigned." Sarah nodded. "Global Task Force Training Program starts next month." Johnson frowned. "You leaving Pendleton?" "Looks that way." Cooper leaned on the doorframe. "Then who's gonna yell at us for sloppy formation?" Sarah smiled faintly. "You'll manage." Thompson exchanged a look with the others, then said, "Ma'am, we wanted to say something before you go." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small coin, engraved with a trident on one side, the Echo 6 emblem on the other. He placed it on her desk. Sarah looked at it, speechless. Thompson said, "You gave us a name, ma'am. We just made it real." Williams added softly, "And if you're teaching the next generation, tell them about us." Sarah exhaled slowly. "I'll tell them about all of you, But the truth is, you're not done yet. The Joint Command wants you as the first American team in the new task force rotation. Their expressions shifted from surprise to pride to a silent understanding. This was no longer just her story. It was theirs. Sarah picked up the coin, feeling its weight. You're ready for this. The world's changing. Maybe it's time the people protecting it did too. 2 weeks later, she arrived at the training complex in Djibouti, an Allied facility near the coast, built where desert met ocean. The sun beat hard against the tarmac as helicopters ferried in recruits from across continents. French commandos, British SAS cadets, Japanese maritime officers, even a handful of Pakistani and Nigerian special forces trainees. They were strong, proud, and suspicious of each other. Sarah could see it in their eyes, the same arrogance she'd seen in Thompson once. Her first speech was short, no theatrics, no slogans. You all come from different flags, she said, standing before them as dust swirled under the rotors. Different languages, different ways of fighting. None of that matters here. The enemy doesn't care what patch is on your sleeve. The only thing that matters is if you can stand next to each other when it counts. A murmur spread through the group, some nodding, others unconvinced. She expected that. Unity wasn't built in words. It was built in moments of pain, trust, and silence. By the second week, fractures were already showing. A French recruit refused to take orders from an American. A British officer mocked a South Asian teammate's accent. A Japanese diver argued with a Nigerian comms specialist over procedure. Each time Sarah intervened quietly, no shouting, just truth. To the French recruit, she said, if you can't follow, you'll never lead. To the British officer, arrogance doesn't travel well. To the diver, adaptation isn't compromise, it's evolution. But the tension didn't fade. It shifted deeper, quieter, more dangerous. Late one night, after a joint training exercise went wrong, a comms failure, a near accident with live rounds, Sarah called them all to the field. The desert air was cold, moonlight spilling across the dunes. She stood before them, arms folded, her tone like stone. You think this is about countries, about pride. Out there, none of that matters. The only thing you'll see is the person next to you, the one holding the line when you can't. Silence. She looked at them, one by one. I've seen too many soldiers die because they couldn't see past themselves. Don't make me watch that again. Then she walked away, leaving them in the quiet. Behind her, she heard whispers fade into thought, and thought into understanding. The next morning, the change began. During drills, the Japanese diver helped the Nigerian comms officer recalibrate his headset. The British recruit offered rations to the Pakistani operator after a long run. The French soldier, the same one who'd refused orders, volunteered to carry extra weight during the next march. Sarah watched from the command tent, her expression softening. Colonel Tangestal's voice came through the secure line. You're making progress. Sarah smirked faintly. I'm making humans out of soldiers. That's progress enough, Tangestal replied. But not everyone approved. That evening, a senior NATO liaison, Major Whitaker, confronted her after a briefing. His voice was polite, but his tone carried warning. Commander Chen, your methods are unconventional. I understand the emotional approach, but this is a military integration program, not therapy. Sarah met his gaze, calm but sharp. You can't integrate people who don't respect each other. If I wanted obedience, I'd train machines. I'm training soldiers. Whitaker folded his arms. With all due respect, Commander, empathy doesn't win wars. Sarah stepped closer, lowering her voice. Neither does ego, Major. He stared at her for a moment, then left without another word. When he was gone, she looked out across the dark base, where recruits were still running night drills under the floodlights. Her breath fogged in the cool air. They don't understand, she thought. They think this is about tactics. It's not. It's about survival, the kind that doesn't depend on who fires first. That night, she found herself walking to the shoreline beyond the compound. The ocean stretched endlessly before her, black and merciless under the moon. She crouched, letting the surf brush against her boots, and closed her eyes. The voices came back again: Ramirez, Tangastal, even her Echo 6 recruits, all echoes of lessons learned the hard way. She whispered, "They'll never know how close humanity came to losing itself." A voice behind her made her turn. It was Williams. He was in fatigues, holding a folded letter in his hand. "Didn't think you'd be out here." "Couldn't sleep," she said, "too quiet." He smiled faintly. "Funny, I thought peace was supposed to be quiet." Sarah looked back at the sea. "Peace isn't silence, Williams. It's just the pause between storms." He nodded, eyes down. "Ma'am, the others got word, deployment orders. Looks like we're rotating east next month." She studied him, recognizing the mixture of pride and fear in his expression. "You'll lead this time." He blinked. "Me." "You've got the instincts. Thompson agrees." He hesitated. "What about you?" "I'll be here," she said softly, "building the next generation, making sure what we started doesn't die when I leave the room." He looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "You taught us that strength isn't about who commands, it's about who carries on." Her eyes glimmered faintly under the moonlight. "Then carry it well." Hours later, as the recruits slept and the desert wind moved through the hangars, Sarah stood once more in the training yard, alone, still. Her voice could have been a whisper in the night, or the closing words of a voiceover fading under music. They say leadership is about power, but power fades. What lasts are the people who learn to believe again, in themselves, in each other. Maybe that's the real victory. Not the war we win, but the humanity we refuse to lose. The camera would rise slowly, desert, ocean, stars, and then a single figure standing against the horizon. Silent, strong, still waiting for the next storm. What do you do when the right thing to do isn't the thing you're ordered to do? The morning heat over Djibouti was unforgiving. The air shimmered above the tarmac as Sarah stood beside a convoy of armored transports, clipboard in hand, the sun cutting sharp lines across her face. The new multinational task force was mid-training rotation, joint drills, communication exercises, medical extractions. But today there was something else in the air, something wrong. The chatter in the operations tent had changed. Whispers, coded messages, quiet tension. Soldiers moved faster, voices lower. Sarah noticed immediately. Inside the command tent, the mood was heavy. A large monitor flickered with satellite images, a cluster of white trucks surrounded by dense brush. Coordinates flashed across the screen. "Where is this?" she asked. Major Whitaker, the NATO liaison, stood stiffly. "Somalia. Humanitarian convoy ambushed near the border. 10 hostages, unknown militia. We've identified the insignia, possible offshoot of al-Shabaab." Sarah frowned. "What's the situation?" "Negotiations ongoing," Whitaker replied. "Command says stand down, no intervention." She blinked, incredulous. "Stand down, they're civilians." He met her gaze evenly. "We're not authorized. The region's outside NATO jurisdiction. Intelligence believes any action could compromise ongoing talks." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Talks won't save hostages already under threat." Whitaker's tone hardened. "That's above our pay grade, Commander." She stared at the map, the same coordinates blinking red, surrounded by silence. Her chest tightened. It was Mindanao all over again. The hesitation, the politics, the waiting while lives hung in balance. And she couldn't shake one thought: if we wait, they die. That evening she stood alone in the observation tower, the desert wind brushing past her. Below, the recruits trained under floodlights, a blur of movement and determination. Among them she spotted Williams, leading his unit through a live-fire course. His voice was steady, commanding. He was becoming everything she'd hoped. But her mind wasn't there. It was on the blinking red marker burned into her thoughts. Footsteps approached behind her. "You're thinking about it," said a voice she knew too well. Colonel Tangistal. Sarah didn't turn. "They're just going to let them die." "Orders are orders." "Not for me." Tangistal's voice softened. "Don't do this, Sarah. You're not Echo 6 anymore." Sarah's eyes flicked toward the horizon. "I trained them to act when no one else would." "Then teach restraint," Tangistal countered. "That's leadership too." Sarah finally turned to face her. "Leadership isn't obedience, it's conscience." For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind carried grit between them like static. Tangistal sighed, shaking her head. "If you go, I can't protect you." Sarah nodded slowly. "You already did, years ago." By midnight, the plan was in motion. Williams found her first, waiting near the hangar, half-suited in combat gear. "You're not authorized to fly out," he said quietly. Sarah zipped her vest. "Neither were we in Mindanao." He hesitated. "Then I'm coming with you." "No," she said firmly. "You've got a command to protect." He stepped closer. "You taught me not to let politics decide who lives and dies." Sarah looked at him, saw the same defiance, the same fire she once carried. It wasn't rebellion, it was conviction. She exhaled. "Grab your kit, 2 others max, we go quiet." Within an hour, a small black helicopter lifted off under the cover of darkness. No transponder, no call sign, just the hum of risk cutting through the desert air. They crossed into Somali airspace before dawn. The terrain below was endless, dunes giving way to scrubland, the faint thread of a river carving through emptiness. Sarah's eyes stayed on the GPS monitor. "We hit the valley from the west. No direct approach. We go in quiet, extraction in 20. Williams nodded. Cooper, now the team's tech specialist, adjusted his headset. "Signals show 5 hostiles near the lead truck. Motion sensors inside. Looks recent." Sarah's hand tightened around her rifle. "Let's finish this fast." They landed 3 clicks out, moving on foot, low, precise, silent. The dawn painted the world in dull orange as they approached the convoy. The trucks were riddled with bullet holes, tarps torn. Voices echoed faintly, men shouting, laughing. Through her scope, Sarah saw one hostage forced to kneel, a gun pressed to the back of his head. Her pulse steadied, time slowed. She whispered, "Positions." Williams and Cooper flanked left. Sarah crawled closer through the dust. Then a radio crackle, a voice in Somali. One of the captors turned sharply. "They know we're here." Gunfire erupted. Sarah moved first, one clean shot, then another. Williams dropped a second target. Cooper jammed the comms, flooding the frequency with static. Chaos. "Move," she ordered. They advanced, covering fire tight and methodical. 2 hostiles down, 3, 4. The last tried to flee. Sarah caught him before he could reach the truck. "Clear," Williams shouted. Sarah rushed forward, cutting the hostages loose. A middle-aged doctor grabbed her arm, trembling. "You're American." She nodded. "You're safe now." But even as she said it, the radio on the ground buzzed, a voice yelling coordinates. "Reinforcements." Cooper swore. "They've got backup coming fast, 6, maybe more." Sarah looked toward the east, a dust cloud rising in the distance. "Time up," she said. "Evac now." They guided the civilians toward the ridge. The first rounds cracked through the air before they hit cover. The firefight ignited, sudden, fierce. Williams returned fire, precise, controlled. Sarah moved alongside him, eyes locked on movement. Cooper flanked right, setting a smoke screen. 5 o'clock incoming. A bullet grazed Sarah's shoulder, hot, searing pain, but she didn't stop. She dropped to one knee, firing 3 rounds clean through the haze. "Bird inbound," Cooper shouted over comms. The helicopter appeared from the west, its rotors slicing through smoke. The pilot's voice came through static. 2-minute window. Copy, Sarah yelled. Everyone move. They sprinted across open ground, covering the civilians. Williams stumbled, taking a hit to the vest but kept moving. Cooper dragged one of the hostages who'd fallen. Gunfire chased them until the final second, until the chopper's door slammed shut and the desert dropped away beneath them. Sarah leaned against the wall, breath ragged, eyes locked on the ground shrinking below. Williams grinned weakly. Guess we're fired. Sarah smiled faintly. Probably. Then she closed her eyes, the adrenaline fatting into silence. Back at base, the fallout was immediate. The helicopter touched down under heavy guard. Major Whitaker was waiting, face pale with anger. "Commander Chen," he snapped, "you violated direct orders, breached airspace, and compromised international protocol." Sarah stepped out, calm but cold, and saved 10 civilians. "That's not the point." "It's the only point." Whitaker's jaw tightened. "You'll be facing tribunal review. Effective immediately, you're suspended from command." Williams moved forward, but Sarah stopped him with a glance. "Stand down." Her voice was steady, controlled. "If this is the price of doing what's right, I'll pay it." She handed over her weapon, her ID, her insignia, each gesture deliberate. Then she walked past him, shoulders straight, eyes forward, a soldier stripped of command but not of conviction. That night she sat alone in her quarters, staring at her trident, the same one that had defined everything she'd become. The silence was thick, pressing. A knock came. Tangastal entered quietly, holding a folder. "Official reprimand. It'll go to review next week." Sarah nodded, figured. "You disobeyed a direct order, Sarah. You know what that means." "Yeah," she said softly. "It means someone's alive tonight who wouldn't be otherwise." Tangastal sighed. "You can't save everyone." Sarah looked up. "I don't try to, just the ones no one else will." The colonel placed the folder on the table but didn't open it. "Instead," she said, "between you and me, command's divided. Some call you reckless, others call you necessary." Sarah gave a faint smile. "Both can be true." Tangastal's tone softened. "You've become the soldier I always hoped you'd be, the one who remembers what we're supposed to protect." Sarah looked out the window, the desert stretching endlessly, stars scattered above like fragments of lost light. "Then why," she whispered, "does it feel like every victory costs a part of me?" Tangastal didn't answer. She didn't need to. Hours later, the base was silent. Sarah walked toward the edge of the runway, wind tugging at her jacket. The lights stretched in perfect lines into the night. Her voice, quiet, reflective, would fade under soft piano if this were on screen. "They teach us that following orders keeps the world stable. But sometimes, the world only changes because someone broke them. Maybe that's the difference between a soldier and a leader. One obeys, the other decides." She stood there until dawn, just a silhouette against the rising sun, waiting for whatever consequence would come. How do you defend your honor when the truth you're fighting for can't be spoken aloud? The tribunal room was cold. Steel walls, fluorescent lights. Rows of uniforms lined in quiet judgment. At the far end sat Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, stripped of her insignia, yet somehow still carrying more authority than anyone else in the room. Her hands rested on the table, steady, calm. Behind her sat Colonel Tangastal, not as her superior this time, but as her witness. Across the table, Major Whitaker cleared his throat, his voice echoing slightly. "Lieutenant Commander Chen," he began, "you stand accused of violating operational protocol, engaging in unauthorized foreign intervention, and endangering diplomatic relations with allied nations." Sarah didn't flinch. Her gaze was fixed on the panel of officers ahead, men and women she'd served beside for years, some sympathetic, some cold, all watching the same question unfold behind their eyes. Did she do wrong, or just what needed to be done? Whitaker continued, "Your actions, while resulting in the safe recovery of 10 civilians, have compromised several international agreements. Do you have any statement before this board reaches its conclusion?" The silence stretched. Then Sarah spoke, voice low, even precise. "I have one." She stood slowly, her posture as straight as it had been the first day she wore the uniform. Her eyes moved from face to face, not accusing, not pleading, simply steady. "I've spent 10 years wearing this flag on my shoulder. 10 years following orders, executing plans, and trusting the chain of command. And I believe in that system, I still do, but systems aren't perfect. They don't bleed. They don't scream. They don't die in the dirt when a mission goes wrong." Her words landed like quiet detonations. "I didn't act out of defiance," she continued. "I acted out of conscience, because when you've seen what hesitation costs, when you've watched good people die while someone higher up decides whether it's worth the risk, you stop asking permission to be human." Whitaker shifted in his seat. "Commander, the issue is not your intentions." She cut him off gently. "Intentions are the only thing that matter when the world's falling apart." A murmur rippled through the room. Sarah exhaled softly. "You can reprimand me. You can strip my rank. But you can't teach soldiers to think for themselves, to feel empathy, to see civilians as more than collateral, and then punish them when they act on it." Her gaze dropped briefly, then rose again, sharp, unyielding. "We train warriors to win wars. Maybe it's time we start training them to prevent them." For a moment, no one spoke. Even Whitaker seemed frozen between indignation and disbelief. Colonel Tangistal's voice broke the silence. "The board has heard enough." Sarah sat down quietly, the tension leaving her shoulders for the first time. Outside, through the narrow window, morning light spilled across the horizon, a soft gold bleeding over the desert. The tribunal recessed. The outcome wasn't announced that day, but somehow Sarah already knew it didn't matter. She said what she came to say. By evening, she walked out of the building with her duffel bag slung over her shoulder. No ceremony, no escort, just the sound of gravel under her boots and the faint call of gulls beyond the base perimeter. Tangistal waited by the jeep, her posture as straight as always. "No official word yet," the colonel said, "but between us, they're letting you go, quietly." Sarah nodded. "Figures." "You should be angry," Tangistal said. Sarah shook her head. "No, I'm tired." They stood there for a moment, the desert wind tugging at their uniforms. Then Tangistal reached into her pocket and handed her a small envelope. "You'll want to read this later." Sarah took it. "What is it?" Tangistal smiled faintly. "Something worth carrying." She turned to leave but paused, her voice softening. "You changed something, Sarah, whether they admit it or not." Sarah gave a quiet nod. "Change never starts with permission." The colonel smiled. "No, it starts with someone willing to take the blame." Then she walked away. That night, Sarah sat alone in her quarters for the last time. The room was bare now, walls stripped, desk empty. The trident sat on the table beside the envelope Tangistal had given her. She opened it slowly. Inside was a letter handwritten in Tangistal's precise, clean script. "For service beyond duty. For leadership beyond command. For courage beyond obedience. The world may not be ready for you, Sarah Chen. But it will remember you. Meryl Tangistal." A faint smile touched her lips, the kind that wasn't joy, but peace. The kind that comes after every battle you fought inside yourself finally quiets. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her duffel. Then she reached for her trident, the symbol that had once defined her and now simply reminded her of who she had become. The next morning, she walked down to the shoreline beyond the base. The ocean stretched endlessly before her, calm, vast, indifferent. The waves whispered against the sand, the same rhythm she'd heard in California, in Mindanao, in every place she'd ever stood between silence and survival. She took the trident from her pocket, feeling its cold metal against her skin. The wind off the water tugged at her hair. In her mind, she heard Ramirez's voice again, the one that had followed her through every mission. "Just be solid when the world is." She whispered back, "I tried." Then, after a long pause, she added, "And maybe that's enough." She knelt and placed the trident gently into the sand, pressing it until it stood upright, glinting in the morning sun. A symbol of what she'd been, and what she'd learned to let go of. Months later, far from Djibouti, a small training base in Portugal carried a new insignia, the Chen Doctrine. A simple statement carved beneath it read, "Discipline with empathy, command with conscience." Inside, soldiers of every nation trained side by side, men and women, young and old, learning tactics born not from dominance, but from understanding. On the wall of the briefing room hung a framed quote, "Unsigned but known by all. Obedience builds armies. Conscience saves them." In the closing scene, if this were a film, we'd see Sarah walking through a quiet coastal town at sunset. No uniform, no rank, just a duffel over her shoulder and salt in the air. Children play by the docks, fishermen haul nets, a bell rings somewhere in the distance. The world goes on. A local woman greets her in Portuguese. Sarah smiles, answers softly, buys a cup of coffee from a seaside stall. As she sits, she watches the ocean again, that eternal battlefield of light and shadow. She looks older now, but lighter somehow. And if a voiceover were to speak now, calm, reflective, soft, it would sound like this. "They taught us how to fight, but not how to stop fighting. They taught us how to lead, but not how to heal. I used to think strength was about never breaking. Now I know it's about breaking and still choosing to stand." She takes a sip of coffee. The sea wind lifts her hair. Behind her, unseen, the wooden trident she'd left in the sand months ago still stands, weathered, silent, unbroken. The waves rise, crash, and retreat, a rhythm as old as war, as endless as peace. Fade to black.